Something unusual happened in Washington this week. No press advisory, no public schedule, no advance leaks, just a quiet arrival, a closed-door meeting, and a photograph designed to send a message far beyond the room where it was taken. New York City's mayor, Zohran Mamdani, traveled to Washington, D.C. for an unannounced sit-down with President Donald Trump. No official agenda released, no briefing beforehand. Only afterward did the public learn what may become one of the most consequential federal housing proposals in decades. 12,000 housing units. That's the number at the center of the meeting. Not a pilot program, not a modest expansion, a massive development proposal that could represent one of the largest federal housing investments in half a century. For a city defined by density, wealth, and staggering inequality, that number is not just large, it's symbolic. It signals ambition, it signals urgency, and it signals political alignment in a place many never expected to see it. Because this is not just about housing, it's about power, it's about leverage, and it's about two political figures who were supposed to be adversaries, now sitting together, smiling for the cameras, and discussing one of the most expensive policy commitments the federal government can make. The mayor later described the meeting as productive. The White House did not publicly elaborate, but behind the scenes, details began to surface. According to the mayor's chief spokesperson, Joe Calvello, the proposal could deliver one of the largest federal housing investments in 50 years. The president, we are told, appeared enthusiastic. Enthusiastic is a carefully chosen word. It implies interest without commitment, approval without obligation, political oxygen without contractual air. And yet the symbolism surrounding the meeting suggests something more deliberate was taking place, something carefully staged. The photograph released afterward shows the two men standing behind the resolute desk inside the Oval Office. Trump is smiling broadly. In his hands are two newspaper front pages. One references a moment burned into New York's political memory, the refusal by Gerald Ford to provide a federal bailout when the city faced financial collapse in the 1970s. That headline, famously interpreted as Washington telling New York to drop dead, remains one of the most emotionally charged symbols of federal abandonment in modern urban history. The second headline is different. It is new, it is celebratory, and it is not real. A mock front page from the New York Daily News declaring federal partnership, declaring construction, declaring triumph. A future headline presented as if it already existed. This was not journalism, it was political theater. The mayor's own team created the mock headline. A prop, a visual pitch, a narrative presented in advance of reality. And the president held it up, smiling, inside the seat of executive power. Optics matter in Washington. Symbols matter even more. What this image communicates is not just policy interest. It communicates alignment, mutual utility, a shared storyline about federal rescue rather than federal refusal. The setting amplifies that message. The resolute desk is not simply furniture. It is the visual shorthand for presidential authority. Standing behind it signals approval, partnership, and endorsement, even when no formal agreement exists. But the housing proposal was not the only subject discussed that day. Another issue entered the conversation, one far more immediate and far more volatile. A university student had been detained by federal immigration authorities. The mayor raised the matter directly with the president, requesting her release and presenting additional names for review. The student attended Columbia University. Federal agents reportedly entered a residential building under disputed circumstances. The mayor intervened personally. The agency overseeing the operation, the Department of Homeland Security, disputed elements of the account. Its enforcement arm, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, faced scrutiny over how the arrest was conducted. Allegations emerged that officers had posed as members of the New York City Police Department to gain entry. Federal officials denied that claim. The mayor says he was told the student would be released. The White House did not publicly confirm. Housing policy and immigration enforcement, two of the most politically combustible issues in American governance, discussed in the same private meeting between leaders whose ideological positions were once defined by open hostility. To understand why this matters, we have to step back and examine the political relationship itself. During the mayoral campaign, these two men were not allies, they were not collaborators, they were opponents separated by ideology, rhetoric, and vision. Trump publicly attacked Mamdani repeatedly, labeling him extreme, dangerous, and unfit. He urged voters to support a different candidate, Andrew Cuomo, who ultimately did not prevail. Mamdani, for his part, campaigned on resisting federal pressure and challenging national leadership. At one point, he promised to become Trump's worst nightmare. That was campaign language. Campaigns thrive on confrontation, but governing operates under different physics. Once elected, the mayor's tone shifted. Criticism became selective. Public clashes diminished. Communication channels opened. Now we see regular conversations, cordial meetings, policy collaboration under discussion. The president himself has publicly acknowledged frequent contact. He has even expressed personal approval, separating policy disagreement from interpersonal respect. This is not uncommon in American politics. Adversaries often cooperate when mutual benefit exists. But what makes this relationship noteworthy is the scale of the issues involved and the symbolic reversal of expectations. A democratic socialist mayor seeking federal investment from a Republican president who built his political identity opposing large-scale urban federal spending. A city that has long positioned itself as resistant to federal pressure, now seeking federal partnership on an unprecedented scale. And a president historically skeptical of sanctuary city policies, now reportedly assisting in immigration case intervention at the request of that same city's leadership. These are not small adjustments. These are structural realignments in behavior, if not in ideology. The housing proposal itself raises deeper questions. 12,000 units is not merely construction, it is land acquisition, zoning approval, financing frameworks, environmental review, infrastructure integration, and long-term affordability management. It is a project measured not in months, but in years, possibly decades. No location has been announced, no funding mechanism disclosed, no timeline presented. Yet the conversation is already framed in historic terms. The largest federal housing investment in half a century. That framing is strategic. It invokes urgency. It invokes legacy. It invites comparison to past federal urban interventions that reshaped entire city landscapes. But it also raises practical questions about implementation. Federal housing initiatives require congressional support, interagency coordination, and sustained political alignment across election cycles. A single enthusiastic meeting does not guarantee any of that. What we are seeing right now is not policy execution, it is narrative formation. The narrative says federal government and New York City are partners. The narrative says ideological divides can be set aside for infrastructure scale. The narrative says Washington is prepared to help build rather than refuse to assist. That narrative directly contrasts with the historical memory embodied in the Gerald Ford headline. That is why the prop mattered. That is why the photograph mattered. That is why the meeting remained unannounced until afterward. Control the optics first. Let policy details follow. There is also the strategic silence surrounding certain topics. The mayor has commented sparingly on federal threats to withhold funding from cities with immigration protections. He has not aggressively challenged national policy in public statements since taking office. In exchange, communication lines remain open. Access remains available. Requests are entertained. This is political pragmatism in its purest form. City governments require federal resources. Federal administrations benefit from visible urban cooperation. Both sides gain from stability. Both sides gain from projects that produce tangible outcomes voters can see. Housing is one of the few policy areas where such alignment can generate measurable physical results: buildings, neighborhoods, and long-term economic activity. If built, 12,000 units would alter housing supply dynamics in America's most expensive city. It would influence rental markets, development patterns, and migration pressures. But the project's political function may be just as significant as its economic impact. For the mayor, federal housing investment validates governance credibility and delivers concrete policy achievement. For the president, supporting large-scale urban development demonstrates national leadership that transcends partisan divides. Both benefit from appearing effective. Both benefit from appearing cooperative. Both benefit from rewriting expectations about their relationship. That is what makes this meeting more than routine policy discussion. It is an experiment in strategic coexistence between between two political figures whose public personas were built on confrontation, and the outcome remains uncertain. There is no signed agreement, no legislative package, no groundbreaking ceremony scheduled. What exists is a conversation, a staged image, a proposed number, and a carefully managed narrative. In Washington, that combination can sometimes lead to historic change. Other times, it leads to nothing at all. For now, what we know is this. An unannounced visit brought New York's mayor into the Oval Office. A housing proposal of unprecedented scale was presented. A detained student's case was discussed. And two leaders once defined by mutual hostility stood side by side, smiling, presenting a future headline as if it were already printed. Whether that headline ever becomes real will depend not on symbolism, but on the machinery of federal governance, budgets, approvals, negotiations, and time. Until those mechanisms move, the meeting remains what it currently is, a moment of political alignment captured in a photograph, carrying the promise of transformation, but not yet the substance. And in American politics, the distance between promise and construction can be vast.